What's ahead for the American economy? A number of stories tonight may give some indication. Everything from the still spreading effect of the giant savings and loan and junk bond scandals to banks and insurance companies worrying about declining real estate values, plus the cost of the Persian Gulf crisis. First, about part of the savings and loan debacle. Bob Schieffer at a Senate Ethics Committee reports on a hearing involving the so-called Keating Five.
It was an unprecedented gathering, 5 U.S. senators facing what amounts to a trial. Ohio's John Glenn, Arizona's John McCain and Dennis DeConcini, Michigan's Don Regal, and one who wasn't there, California's Alan Cranston, who reported last week he has cancer. Families clustered behind them. McCain's mother made it in spite of a broken leg. It was a moment of high drama in the life of the Senate. Some of its most prominent members called before their peers to answer questions that might once have been unthinkable.
Many of our fellow citizens apparently believe that your services were bought by Charles Keating, that you were bribed, that you sold your office, that you traded your honor and your good names for contributions and other benefits.
Charles Keating, now under indictment in connection with the failure of his Lincoln S&L, poured more than $1.3 million into the 5 senators' campaigns and political organizations. The question, did those contributions cause the senators to exert improper pressure on federal bank regulators on Keating's behalf?
There is nothing wrong in a senator meeting with a regulator. In fact, it's expected.
This is simply not a case in all instances of simple and routine constituent service.
The senators did lobby regulators for Keating, but was it proper, asked Committee Counsel Bennett, for some of those meetings to be held in secret, with staff aides ordered to stay outside? And what about their other constituents?
And the taxpayers who'll have to pay for Lincoln's failure and are also the senators' constituents. All of these people had constituent rights. Who was listening to their concerns when the meetings and the phone calls to regulators were occurring, and in certain instances occurring in secret?
The senators won't respond officially until tomorrow, but Bennett's presentation left several seething.
I don't think anybody would contend that I've heard, even the committee, that this is a fair process.
You got a presentation with with the value judgments of Mr. Bennett on it. Tomorrow you're going to get the full story.
The one happy man tonight was Arizona's John McCain, when Committee Counsel Bennett said that he personally believed McCain had done nothing improper. McCain called that vindication. Dan?
Thanks, Bob. New details emerging tonight about the government's newest and biggest case yet in the still unfolding savings and loan debacle. The government is charging Drexel Burnham Lambert Incorporated with spreading, quote, a gospel of greed that ruined dozens of savings and loans. Business correspondent Ray Brady has our report on that.
It's now a burnt-out, bankrupt brokerage house, Drexel Burnham Lambert. But it's the target of a $6.8 billion government suit. 2 government agencies are charging it use junk bonds along with bribery, coercion, extortion, and fraud to plunder more than 40 savings and loans.
I think the government has 2 objects in the suit. One is to recover as much money as is conceivable from the parties that benefited during this horrible disaster. And the second is to send a message for the future that people will be held accountable.
The brokerage denies the charges, saying Drexel has become a convenient scapegoat for the S&L crisis. But in the heyday of the money-mad 1980s, Drexel and Michael Milken, the junk bond king, made billions of dollars in high-risk, high-yield junk bonds, many of them bought by S&Ls with money insured by U.S. taxpayers. Drexel was so powerful, says the government, it even enabled Charles Keating to take control of the big Lincoln savings and loan. Drexel's reward?
Well, these savings loans would then, as soon as they were up and running, began then to link hands and form these daisy chains.
Daisy chains is the Wall Street term for the way Drexel junk bond values were inflated. One S&L would sell junk bonds to another for, say, $100, which passed it along for $150 to an S&L that would sell it for $200 and so on. But the chain collapsed, sticking the S&Ls and the taxpayer with junk bonds now worth less than half of what was paid for them. Up until then, though, the S&Ls appeared to be earning huge sums, and many of those running S&Ls pocketed fortunes.
Whatever the merit of the government claim against Drexel, critics point out it was government regulators who allowed the S&Ls to run wild, buying junk bonds and other investments that never should have been financed with money insured by the American taxpayer. Ray Brady, CBS News, New York.
A short while ago, I spoke with well-known Wall Street newsletter publisher James Grant, who was among the first to warn that junk bonds and savings and loans were headed for disaster. All right, Mr. Grant, what effect is this whole savings and loan junk bond debacle having on our economy?
Well, it's making lenders who in the boom were absolutely courageous, making them timid. And in the boom, it was almost impossible not to get a loan. And now it will be increasingly difficult to get one. It will be a very big change indeed.
Very difficult to get a loan. That, together with the prospect of something happening in the Persian Gulf and sending all these troops there, what does that tell us about where the economy is now and where it's going?
Well, if it were that easy, we would all be richer. I think what it suggests is that the economy, in a bad way already, will get in a far worse way. I think the troubles began well before the Persian Gulf threatened us all, and they will continue long after any resolution of that situation. I think it's a financial problem and not a geopolitical one.
Now, President Bush, his aides, and some leading newspapers say we are not in a recession. Are we in a recession or not?
Well, they do never issue a press release, but it seems to me that we are, and I think that when the revisions are done, it will have begun in June or perhaps March. I think we're well into it, but I fear it will be very long and deep as opposed to short and shallow.
You think it's going to be a long trough. How long?
Well, I think it'll be a matter of a year or 2 years rather than the hoped for 3 or 6 months. And what makes me think that is, in part, the financial situation is in a very bad way. For instance, there are a lot of big banks in New York that are now objectively in a worse way than they were in the Great Depression. The state of lending and of banking in this country is very, very low indeed.